In the dusty heart of the Arizona Territory, there was a town called Dead Rock Gulch, and in that town, there was a girl named Delaney Rose McGrow. To everyone, she was just the poor cowgirl, the one with the patched-up hat and the ornery old mule named Gus. She was a ghost in her own town, someone people looked through, not at. So when she inherited her Uncle Jeremiah's homestead, nobody thought twice. They called it McGrow's Folly, a worthless patch of sun-scorched earth, 20 miles from anything. Nothing but sand, scorpions, and old ghost stories. The townsfolk laughed. They watched her ride out on that mule, a picture of hopeless determination, and they whispered behind their hands. They watched her struggle to make something from nothing, with nothing but grit. But they didn't know what was sleeping just beneath that cracked desert earth. They didn't know about the secret. A secret that had been waiting since the 1850s. A secret left behind when a mysterious miner vanished into thin air. A shimmering, glittering fortune. A hidden vein of pure silver, worth $120 million. The second Delaney laid eyes on that glimmering rock, her name went from a joke to a prayer on every miner's lips. The same people who spat her name in the dust were suddenly lining up, hats in hand, trying to get a piece of her favor. But this newfound wealth wasn't a blessing. It was a target painted on her back. Would this fortune bring the redemption she'd always dreamed of? Or would it burn down the only home she'd ever known? The morning sun sliced long, sharp shadows across the main street of Dead Rock Gulch. Delaney Rose McGrow walked toward Henderson's general store, her worn-out boots stirring up little clouds of red dust. At 28, she had the quiet, unbreakable dignity of someone who learned young that life doesn't give you anything for free. Her dark hair, already streaked with silver from a lifetime under that relentless sun, was pulled back tight under her father's old hat. It was a battered brown felt, the brim mended with leather patches that told their own story of survival. Around her neck, a silver locket caught the light. It was tarnished, heavy with memory. Inside was the only photograph she had of her parents, Thomas and Mary, taken on their wedding day in 1845. She touched it without thinking, a familiar comfort against the rough fabric of her shirt. It had been her mother's, passed down through a line of McGrow women, each one tougher than the last. "Morning, Delaney," Mrs. Henderson called from behind the counter. Her voice had that special tone, the one reserved for people who paid their bills on time but never had a penny to spare. "Got your usual ready?" Delaney nodded, her fingers carefully counting out the coins from a small leather purse. 2 pounds of flour, a tin of beans, a small sack of coffee. Enough to last the week if she was careful. She was always careful. She had been stretching every dollar until it screamed for as long as she could remember. The tiny room she rented above the saloon took most of what she earned from odd jobs, mending clothes, helping with harvests, breaking wild horses for ranchers who didn't care that she was a woman, so long as she had steady hands. "Heard tell you might be coming into some property?" Mrs. Henderson said, leaning forward. Her eyes were bright with small-town curiosity, the kind that spreads faster than wildfire. Your Uncle Jeremiah, God rest his soul. The news had hit Dead Rock Gulch 3 days ago. The mail rider brought word from the territorial capital. Jeremiah McGrow, her father's older brother, had passed in his sleep. He left behind a homestead and a will that named his only living relative. Delaney barely remembered him. He was a quiet man, with kind eyes, who'd visited their family farm a few times before the influenza came, and took her parents, leaving her an orphan at 16. "Yes, ma'am," Delaney said, gathering her supplies. "Seems Uncle Jeremiah remembered me." Mrs. Henderson leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, I hope it's more than that patch of desert he was squatting on. Nothing out there but sand, scorpions, and old ghost stories. Folks been calling it cursed land ever since that miner disappeared back in '53. The bell above the door chimed, sharp and sudden. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood stepped inside. His expensive suit was a black slash against the dusty, sun-bleached world of the general store. He was a man who had never known a day of doubt in his life, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Behind him, like a shadow, was his nephew, Marcus Blackwood. He was younger, with pale, calculating eyes that were always measuring, always looking for an angle. "Miss McGraw," the mayor said, his nod formal and cold. "I understand congratulations are in order regarding your inheritance." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Delaney replied. She felt her spine straighten on its own. The Blackwood family owned the biggest ranch in the territory. Their name was law. "I hope you'll consider our offer to purchase the property," Marcus interjected, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "It's rough country out there. Hardly suitable for a woman living alone. We'd be willing to offer a fair price, enough to set you up comfortably in town." Delaney's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in her cheek. "I haven't even seen the place yet, Mr. Blackwood. Seems premature to be discussing a sale." The mayor's smile was a patronizing thing. Of course. But when you do see it, you'll understand our generosity. That land has been nothing but trouble for decades. Better to cut your losses before you get attached." Delaney didn't say another word. She just nodded, picked up her things, and slipped out of the store while the Blackwoods conducted their business. Her mind was a whirlwind. Why would the most powerful, richest family in the territory be so desperate to buy land they claimed was worthless? The question settled like a cold stone in her gut. She walked down the street toward the blacksmith shop. The rhythmic clang of a hammer on an anvil grew louder, a steady, honest sound in the quiet town. It was accompanied by the sharp hiss of hot metal quenching in water. Colt Ramirez was working. His dark hair was damp with sweat, and the muscles in his forearms flexed and coiled as he shaped a glowing horseshoe. At 32, he had the quiet confidence of a man who had seen the world but chosen this small corner of it for his own. "Morning, Colt," Delaney said, setting her packages down. He looked up, and his brown eyes crinkled at the corners. It was a genuine warmth, something rare in Dead Rock Gulch. "Morning, Delaney. Heard about your uncle. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said. She was grateful he didn't immediately start talking about the land. "I was wondering if you might have time to look at my mule's shoes. Stubborn old Gus has been favoring his left front hoof." "Of course," Colt said, putting his hammer down. "No charge. You helped my sister Elena when she was sick last spring. I never properly thanked you for that." Delaney remembered. Elena had been burning with fever, the town doctor miles away. Delaney had sat with her for 2 nights, using the herbal remedies her mother had taught her, until the fever finally broke. "Your sister's a good woman," Delaney said. "She'd have done the same for me." "She would have," Colt agreed. "But you're the one who did it. That matters." Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of Jake Morrison, a local rancher. His face was weathered leather, his eyes narrowed from a lifetime of scanning distant, empty horizons. "Delaney," he grunted, nodding curtly. "Heard you inherited old Jeremiah's place. You planning to actually live out there?" "I'm planning to take a look first," she answered, her voice even. "Make my own decisions." Jake spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "What you'll find is trouble. That land's been cursed since Black Pete Morrison disappeared. No relation to me, mind you. But folks say he buried something out there before he vanished. Gold, silver, who knows? Point is, nothing good comes from that place." "Superstitions," Colt said quietly, but there was a note of caution in his voice. "Though it's true, the land has a history." "History," Jake scoffed. "That's one word for it. Haunted is another. You ask me, you'd be smart to sell to the Blackwoods and be done with it. Buy yourself a nice little house in town. Maybe find a husband." Delaney's temper flared, a hot spark in her chest, but she kept her voice as steady as a rock. "I appreciate the advice, Mr. Morrison, but I'm quite capable of making my own decisions." "Suit yourself," Jake shrugged, climbing back on his horse. "But don't say you weren't warned when that place starts showing you its true colors." After he left, a comfortable silence settled between Delaney and Colt. The blacksmith shop felt like a sanctuary, filled with the honest smells of iron and coal. "You don't believe in curses, do you?" Delaney finally asked. Colt wiped his hands on his leather apron. "I believe in being careful, and I believe in people making their own choices without the whole town breathing down their neck." "The Blackwoods seem mighty interested," Delaney observed, thinking out loud, "for land they claim isn't worth much." "The Blackwoods are interested in control," Colt said, his voice carefully diplomatic. "It's what powerful families do. But you think there might be more to it?" Colt met her gaze, his eyes direct and serious. "I think your uncle was a smart man who kept to himself. If he left you that land, he had his reasons. Maybe you should find out what they were before you listen to anyone else." Walking back to her small room at the boarding house, the silver locket felt heavy against her chest. She thought of her parents, her father, the dreamer, who always saw potential in the harsh desert, her mother, the practical one, whose eyes still sparkled at his talk of possibilities. What would they tell her to do? Take the safe path and sell, or follow her gut? That evening, watching the sun bleed across the mountains, Delaney made her decision. Tomorrow, she would ride out to McGrow's Folly. She would ignore the warnings, the condescending offers, the ghost stories. She would trust herself. The locket caught the last ray of sunlight. For a moment, she could almost hear her mother's voice whispering on the wind. "Trust your heart, darling. It knows the way." As darkness fell over Dead Rock Gulch, Delaney Rose McGrow had no idea she was preparing for a journey that would shatter her world. She didn't know that a fortune in silver was waiting. She didn't know her uncle's worthless land would soon make her the most talked about and most endangered woman in the territory. All she knew was that tomorrow she would ride out to claim what was hers. The ride out to the homestead was 20 miles of brutal, beautiful emptiness. Saguaro cacti stood like ancient, silent guardians against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Her mule, Gus, picked his way along the barely there trail, his ears twitching at every whisper of the wind. When she crested a low ridge, she saw it. A modest adobe cabin that seemed to have grown right out of the desert floor. It was bigger than she'd expected, with thick walls built to defy the blazing summer heat. A small barn, its roof half collapsed, stood nearby. A hand-dug well marked the center of the yard. The silence was absolute. Delaney dismounted, tying Gus to a hitching post carved from a sturdy mesquite branch. She pushed open the front door, which was hanging slightly ajar. It creaked on dried leather hinges. The air inside was cool and dim, smelling faintly of sage and old wood smoke. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight. It was a simple place. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed covered with a colorful quilt. But something in the corner near the fireplace caught her eye. Half buried under a pile of old newspapers was a pickaxe. It was ancient. The wooden handle was worn smooth by hands long dead. The iron head was pitted with rust and time. She lifted it. It felt heavy, balanced, like it belonged in her hands. And then she saw the letters, faded but still clear, carved into the handle. PM 1853. Her blood went cold. She remembered Jake Morrison's words. Black Pete Morrison. Disappeared back in 53. Could this have been his? How did it end up in her uncle's cabin? She searched the rest of the cabin but found nothing. No letters, no diary, no explanation. Just the silent cabin and the heavy, mysterious pickaxe. That night she slept fitfully, dreaming of shadows and glittering things hidden deep in the earth. She woke before dawn to a strange sound outside. A scraping, scratching noise near the well. She stepped out into the pre-dawn chill. The eastern sky was just beginning to blush with light. Coiled near the base of the well was a huge diamondback rattlesnake. Its scales gleamed in the dim light, its rattle a low, menacing buzz. But it wasn't looking at her. It seemed fascinated by something at the well's edge. Cautiously, Delaney used the long handle of the pickaxe to nudge the snake away. The serpent didn't strike. It just uncoiled and glided smoothly toward a dry creek bed that snaked past the homestead, disappearing into the desert. It moved with a strange purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Curiosity got the better of her. Delaney followed. The creek bed was dry as a bone, its sandy bottom littered with smooth stones. The snake was gone, but Delaney's eyes were caught by something else. There, embedded in the eroded bank, was a flash of light, a glittering, shimmering streak in the dirt. Her heart stopped. She knelt, her breath catching in her throat. She had seen enough silver ore in her life to know. This was the real thing. But this was different. This was pure. The vein was thick, almost 3 feet wide, and it ran deep into the bank, disappearing into the earth. With trembling hands, she took the old pickaxe, the one marked PM 1853. She chipped away at the surrounding rock. More of the metal was revealed. It wasn't just a vein. It was a solid, massive load of silver, gleaming like a river of captured starlight. Her uncle's worthless homestead, McGrow's folly. It was sitting on top of one of the richest silver strikes in the history of the Arizona Territory. Standing there in the dry creek bed, with an ancient pickaxe in her hands and a fortune at her feet, Delaney Rose McGrow felt the world shift. The poor cowgirl was gone. In her place was the owner of a silver mine that could make her richer than the Blackwoods, richer than anyone she had ever known. But a cold question cut through the thrill. If the silver was this rich, Uncle Jeremiah must have known. Why did he live in poverty? Why did he never touch it? And why were the Blackwoods so desperate to buy land they publicly called worthless? As the sun climbed, painting the desert in harsh, bright light, Delaney carefully covered the exposed silver with rocks and sand. She memorized the spot, the curve of the creek, the shape of the boulders. The ride back to Dead Rock Gulch was a blur. She carried her secret like a physical weight. The poor cowgirl was about to become one of the wealthiest women in the territory, if she could figure out how to claim her inheritance without getting herself killed. For 3 days, the secret was a fire in her chest. She went through the motions of her life, mending curtains, unloading supplies, while her mind raced. The sample of silver ore, wrapped in a cloth, stayed hidden beneath her mattress. Every night she'd unwrap it, the metal cool and heavy in her palm, a promise of a future she could barely imagine. But the fear was growing. Too many questions, too many people interested in her worthless land. On the 4th day, back at the homestead to gather her uncle's few belongings, she found it. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a hand-drawn map. It was old, the paper yellowed and fragile, dating back to the 1850s. It was a surveyor's map. It showed that her uncle's property was far larger than the deed described. It extended deep into the desert, and it showed the exact location of mining claims filed by one P. Morrison in 1853. The claims covered the precise area where she'd found the silver vein. Black Pete Morrison had known. He had filed the papers. But according to a small note in the margin, the claims were never officially registered with the territorial government. The paperwork existed, but it had been buried. The mineral rights left in a legal limbo for over 30 years. Her uncle hadn't just known about the silver. He'd had the map. He'd had the proof. Armed with this, Delaney returned to the homestead. She used the map to mark the true boundaries of her land. It was a massive tract, and the map was dotted with cryptic symbols suggesting other mineral deposits. She went back to the creek bed. With her new mining tools, bought under the guise of prospecting for garnets, she began to systematically explore the silver deposit. It was bigger than she had ever dreamed. It wasn't just a vein, it was a massive underground lode that seemed to have no end. The sheer scale of it was terrifying. Why would her uncle live like a hermit when this kind of fortune was just feet beneath his floor? The answer was carved into the rock face of the vein itself, almost invisible beneath decades of erosion. The initials PM 1853. And beneath them, 3 words that sent a deathly chill through her soul. Here lies my doom. What had Black Pete Morrison meant? Had he known this silver was a curse? Is that why her uncle had been afraid of it, choosing poverty over the danger that came with this kind of wealth? As she worked, she felt it. The feeling of being watched. Twice she saw dust clouds on the distant ridges. Riders. They weren't just passing through, they moved with a purpose that felt like surveillance. On the 3rd day, her fears were confirmed. She was working in the creek bed when she heard the sound of approaching horses. She scrambled to cover her work, hiding behind a large boulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 riders, well-armed, well-mounted. They rode straight to the cabin and began a systematic search. They were professionals. They examined the well, the barn, the creek bed. They were looking for something specific. After an hour, they rode off, leaving nothing but hoof prints and a thick cloud of menace in the air. That night, back in her room, Delaney spread the surveyor's map out. She studied it by candlelight. It was more than just a map. It was filled with geological surveys and coded notes. One notation caught her eye. It was near the silver deposit, a small symbol, and beside it, the words, Morrison's cache, Guardian's price, a cache. He had hidden something more than just mining claims. And Guardian's price. The words felt like a threat. She knew she couldn't do this alone anymore. The secret was too big, the danger too real. She needed to trust someone, and the only person in Dead Rock Gulch she did trust was Colt Ramirez. The decision was a dangerous one. Once she shared the secret, there was no taking it back. It would put them both in the line of fire, but she was out of options. The poor cowgirl was about to play a game with stakes she was only just beginning to understand. Life and death, fortune and ruin. And the first move was to trust the quiet blacksmith with the honest eyes. The next morning, she walked into the blacksmith shop. The familiar rhythm of the hammer stopped as she entered. Colt looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "You look like you've got something weighing on your mind," he said. "I do," she replied, her voice low. "I need to show you something, but I need your word. What I'm about to share stays between us." His expression turned serious. "You have it." Delaney opened the small leather pouch she carried and poured a handful of raw silver ore onto his workbench. The metal glittered in the morning light, seeming to pulse with a life of its own. Colt stared, then picked up the largest piece, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Sweet Mother of God," he whispered. "Where did you find this?" "Uncle Jeremiah's property," she said. "There's a vein in the creek bed. It's not a pocket, Colt. It's a lode. It could be worth millions." Colt set the ore down, his face a mixture of awe and deep concern. "Delaney, do you have any idea what this means? If word gets out, every claim jumper and fortune hunter in the territory will be on that homestead." "I know. That's why I came to you. I can't do this alone." He was quiet for a long moment, turning the silver over in his hands. "This explains why the Blackwoods want your land so badly," he said finally. "They must know about it." "How could they?" "These old families have long memories," Colt said. "Stories get passed down. Maps get inherited." Delaney pulled out the surveyor's map and spread it on the bench. Colt's eyes traced the lines, the notations, his interest growing. "This is Morrison's original survey," he said, his voice hushed. He pointed to the cryptic symbols scattered across the page. "These markings? They usually indicate different types of mineral deposits. Silver, gold, copper. Delaney, your uncle's homestead might be sitting on one of the richest mineral fields in Arizona." The world tilted. She had found a river of silver. Now there could be more, gold, copper, a treasure beyond her wildest comprehension. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "First, we need to get these samples assayed. I know a man in Tucson. He's reliable, but we have to be discreet. I'll have to take them myself. And filing the claim?" "That's complicated," Colt admitted. "Mining law is a mess. You'll need to file in Phoenix, but you'll also need to establish what they call continuous possession. You have to live on the property, work the claim. It's to stop speculators. If you don't, someone can challenge you and take it all. The words hit her like a physical blow. Live out there, alone? A woman sitting on a fortune with men like the Blackwoods circling like vultures? It was a death sentence. I can't, she said quietly. Not alone. Colt's gaze was steady, resolute. You won't be alone, he said. If you're willing to trust me, I'll help you. I'll protect your claim. There was a hardness in his eyes she'd never seen before, a hint of a world far beyond the peaceful blacksmith shop. I have some experience with difficult situations, he added, a cryptic edge to his voice. Let's just say I wasn't always a blacksmith. The mystery of his past should have scared her. Instead, it was a comfort. If she was going to war, she needed a soldier by her side. All right, she said, her decision made. I'm trusting you with my life. You won't regret it, he promised. I'll leave for Tucson tomorrow. I'll be back in a week. While I'm gone, you act normal. Don't go near the homestead. Don't attract any attention. What about the riders I saw? His expression darkened. Then we're already running out of time. When I get back, we move fast. That night, Delaney felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. She had inherited a fortune, but with it came a deadly secret and powerful enemies. She had trusted her secret to a man with his own secrets. She had crossed a line. There was no going back. The game for the McGraw silver had begun, and she was just starting to realize how many players were already at the table. The week Colt was gone was the longest week of Delaney's life. Every knock on the door, every strange face in town, sent a jolt of fear through her. She forced herself through her daily routine, her hands trembling as she mended clothes, her mind 1,000 miles away at the homestead. On the 5th day, Mayor Blackwood paid her a visit. His polished carriage pulled up to the boarding house. He approached her on the porch where she was pretending to read a 3-week-old newspaper. Miss McGraw, he said, his smile thin and practiced, I've been thinking about your situation. I'd like to make you a more generous offer for the land. He had never made a first offer. Only his nephew had, a slip. I'm prepared to offer $500, he said smoothly, for the entire homestead and all mineral rights. $500. It was more money than she'd ever had in her life. It was also an insult. An offer that size for worthless land was a confession. He knew, or he suspected, and he was getting nervous. That's very generous, sir, she said, her voice carefully neutral. But I'm not ready to sell. His smile vanished. I feel obligated to warn you, my dear. That area has a troublesome history. Black Pete Morrison, a dangerous man. Some say he buried stolen gold out there. Attracts a rough crowd, not the sort of place for a respectable woman. He was trying to scare her. He was trying to tell her a story, a lie he wanted her to believe. 2 days later, Colt returned. They met after dark in the cold, silent blacksmith shop. He spread a set of official-looking documents on his workbench. The assayer's report, he said, his voice grave. It's beyond anything I expected. The samples are nearly pure silver. He estimates the load is worth at least $20 million, and he thinks the actual yield could be much, much higher. Delaney felt the air leave her lungs. $20 million. It was a number so large it felt unreal. That's not all, Colt continued, sliding another paper forward. He analyzed the markings on your map. He thinks your property also has significant deposits of gold and copper, possibly even gemstones. Colt looked her straight in the eye. He thinks the total value could exceed $100 million. The number was a physical shock. From a worthless patch of dirt to one of the richest mineral fields in the American West. The fortune was a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. There's more, Colt said, his voice dropping. I did some research in the territorial records. Your Uncle Jeremiah filed very specific, very clever mineral rights claims 3 years ago. He never developed them, but he established clear legal title to everything on that property. So, it's legally mine? She asked, a flicker of hope. Yes and no, Colt replied. The rights are yours, but only if you maintain continuous possession and show active development within 6 months. If you abandon the property, someone can file a competing claim, and the Blackwoods have been buying up every inch of land surrounding yours. They've built a cage around your property, and you're the prize inside. So that was the game. They couldn't take it legally, so they would wait. They would wait for her to run, to give up, to make one mistake, and then they would pounce. I also found something else, Colt said, his voice turning grim. Something about Black Pete Morrison. According to official documents I found in the federal archives, he wasn't a prospector or an outlaw. Colt slid one final faded document across the workbench. He was a federal agent, and he was sent here in the 1850s to investigate illegal mining operations and claim-jumping schemes. The world spun. Black Pete Morrison wasn't a ghost story. He was a lawman. So he didn't bury stolen gold, Delaney whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. No, Colt said, his voice like stone. He was investigating the people who were stealing the claims, and someone killed him for it. The implication hung in the air, heavy and cold as a tombstone. She wasn't just fighting claim jumpers. She was facing the same people who had murdered a federal agent 30 years ago and covered it up. The weight of it all was crushing. The silver, the gold, the lies, the murder. She wasn't just fighting for an inheritance anymore. She was standing on a buried battlefield, and the ghosts were starting to wake up. Delaney knew she had to go back. The map, the note about Morrison's cache, the answers were out there, in the desert. With Colt by her side, they returned to the homestead. This time, it wasn't just a visit. It was an occupation. They brought supplies, tools, and rifles. They were digging in for a war. While Colt worked on reinforcing the barn, turning the homestead into a defensible position, Delaney searched the cabin one last time. Her foot hit a floorboard near the fireplace. It gave slightly. It sounded hollow. Prying it up, she found a hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. It was her Uncle Jeremiah's. His careful handwriting filled the pages, entries dating back 3 years. As Delaney read, the full, terrifying truth of her inheritance finally came to light. March 15th, 1884. The Blackwood family has been asking too many questions about mineral surveys. I suspect they know more than they are letting on. April 2nd, 1884. Met with William Harrison in Phoenix, an old friend from the war. He agrees Delaney deserves protection. The special mineral rights classification he granted should protect her claim, if she can hold the land. May 12th, 1884. Found Morrison's personal effects hidden in a cave near the silver deposit. Among them, a report he was preparing to send to Washington. It names names. The grandfather of our current mayor was at the heart of the conspiracy. August 15th, 1884. Someone is watching the homestead. Riders on the ridge. I fear my activities have not gone unnoticed. Delaney's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Her uncle hadn't just known about the silver. He had uncovered the entire conspiracy. He knew Morrison was a federal agent. He knew the Blackwoods were at the center of it. Then she read the final entry, the ink shaky, written just 2 weeks before his death. January 10th, 1885. If Delaney is reading this, then I am gone. She has inherited a great fortune and a deadly secret. The silver is a prize, but it has already cost one man his life and may cost her hers. Trust no one in Dead Rock Gulch, except the blacksmith. Colt Ramirez is not what he appears to be, but his intentions toward her are honorable. The truth about Morrison is hidden in the cave where I found his effects. May God protect her. Delaney looked up from the journal, her heart pounding. Her uncle had known. He had known Colt was more than just a blacksmith. When Colt came inside that evening, she showed him the journal. He read the final passage, the one with his name, and a look of resignation crossed his face. Your uncle was a perceptive man, he said quietly. Who are you, Colt? she asked, her voice steady. He stared out the window into the moonlit desert for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Stripped of the quiet blacksmith, all that remained was steel. "My name is Colt Ramirez," he said, "but I'm also Deputy U.S. Marshal Colt Ramirez. I was sent to Dead Rock Gulch 2 years ago to investigate territorial corruption. I've been working undercover, trying to build a case against the Blackwood family." The revelation should have been a shock. It wasn't. It was a key, locking everything into place. "So you've been investigating them all along," she said. "The government has suspected for years that a conspiracy was stealing mineral rights. We just couldn't prove it. The Blackwoods are protected. They have allies in high places." "What about Peter Morrison's murder?" "The case was never officially closed," Colt replied. "If your uncle really found his report, it could be the evidence we need to bring them all down." Delaney felt a shift inside her. This wasn't just about her inheritance anymore. It was bigger. The information her uncle had uncovered, the evidence Morrison had died to protect, was the real treasure. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Colt said, his voice filled with a quiet, deadly determination. "We find Morrison's hidden report, and then we finish what he started 30 years ago." They found the cave the next day. It was hidden behind a tangle of Palo Verde trees, the entrance a narrow slit in the rock, just as the journal described. Inside, tucked into a crevice, was a leather saddlebag. It had been sealed against the desert for 3 decades. The contents made their blood run cold. There was Morrison's badge, and there were wanted posters for an outlaw named Black Pete Morrison. It was his cover. He had been posing as a known criminal to get close to the conspiracy. But it was the documents that stole their breath. First, a geological survey from 1852. It predated Morrison's investigation by a year. It was commissioned by a company called the Eastern Mining Consortium. And listed among its directors were the names of the most powerful families in the territory, including the grandfather of Mayor Cornelius Blackwood. They had known about the silver, the gold, all of it, for over 30 years. The conspiracy wasn't just about stealing a few claims. It was about systematically seizing control of an entire region's mineral wealth, based on secret knowledge. And then they found Morrison's final report. It was a map of murder. It detailed dozens of properties where legitimate claimants had died under suspicious circumstances or simply vanished. Their land then snapped up by companies connected to the consortium. It was a systematic campaign of terror and murder. Then Delaney saw it. A case file that made her vision go red. The accidental deaths of her own parents, Thomas and Mary McGrow. According to Morrison's notes, they had filed a small mineral claim on their farm just weeks before they both died in a sudden, isolated influenza outbreak that touched no one else in the area. Their claim was quietly transferred to a Blackwood-owned company after their deaths. "They killed my parents," she whispered, the words like poison on her tongue. The influenza, the story that had defined her entire life, was a lie. A cover for murder. Colt's face was grim. He pulled out one last document from the bag. It was a list of current targets, people the conspiracy planned to eliminate. At the very top of the list, circled in red ink, was a name. Jeremiah McGrow. Eliminate before he can file formal claims. Her uncle knew. He knew they were coming for him. That's why he lived in fear, in poverty. That's why he never touched the silver. Any attempt to mine it would have been a death warrant. Delaney felt the weight of 30 years of injustice settle on her shoulders. This was never just about the money. This was about vengeance. For her parents, for her uncle, for Peter Morrison, for dozens of forgotten victims. She was no longer the poor cowgirl. She was a witness, a survivor. And she held the evidence that could burn the Blackwood Empire to the ground. Colt sent a coded telegram to his superiors. Backup was coming. But the Blackwoods had spies everywhere. They must have been alerted that the game was up, because the attack came at dawn. Delaney saw them first. A dust cloud on the southern horizon, growing fast. A large group of riders moving at a full gallop. "They're here!" she yelled. Marshal Torres, the lead federal agent who had arrived with a small advance team just hours before, barked orders. The marshals took defensive positions. Colt shoved a loaded revolver into Delaney's hands. "Stay low and stay behind cover," he said, his voice deadly calm. "They're not here to talk." At least 12 men, led by a rage-contorted Marcus Blackwood, descended on the homestead, rifles blazing. The morning air exploded with the thunder of gunfire. Bullets ripped through the air, thudding into the thick adobe walls of the cabin. One of the marshals cried out and fell. This wasn't a warning. It was an execution. They were here to kill everyone and bury the evidence forever. Delaney huddled behind the wall, terror a cold knot in her stomach. But as the bullets flew, something inside her changed. The fear was burned away by a cold, sharp rage. These were the men who had murdered her parents. These were the men who had hunted her uncle. They were not gods. They were just desperate criminals. The attackers had made a mistake. They had charged across open ground, and the marshals, firing from cover, were picking them off with grim efficiency. Marcus Blackwood saw the attack failing. He screamed for his men to fall back, but as he turned to flee, a marshal's shot took his horse out from under him. He was thrown violently to the ground. "Surrender!" Marshal Torres yelled. Blackwood's answer was to fire his rifle wildly at the cabin. The bullet screamed past Delaney's head, so close she felt the wind of its passage, and something snapped. Without thinking, she raised the heavy revolver Colt had given her, leveled it, and fired. The gun bucked in her hand. Across the yard, Marcus Blackwood staggered back, clutching a bloody shoulder, his rifle dropping from his fingers. Seeing their leader fall broke the attackers' will. They threw down their weapons, their hands shooting into the air. The gunfight was over. Delaney stood in the doorway of the cabin, the smoking revolver still in her hand. The immediate danger had passed, but this was far from over. "They know," Marshal Torres said, his face grim. "The rest of them know we have the evidence. They'll be trying to flee." "Then we don't give them the chance," Delaney said, her voice hard as steel. The frightened girl was gone. In her place was a woman forged in fire and gunpowder. "These men killed my parents. I won't let them escape." The final showdown happened in town. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood had barricaded himself in the town hall with his last loyal men. He was trying to rally the townspeople, shouting about an illegal federal invasion. But it was Delaney who ended it. She walked into the town square, not with a gun, but with a piece of paper. The original land deed. The one that proved her family had legally owned the mineral-rich property for over 30 years, predating every single one of the Blackwoods' fraudulent claims. Marshal Torres read it aloud. The townspeople, who had lived under the Blackwood family's thumb for generations, fell silent. The truth was undeniable. Mayor Blackwood emerged from the hall, his face pale, his empire crumbling around him. "You have no authority here," he blustered, his voice thin. "Murdering a federal agent makes it our authority," Torres replied, his voice like ice. "Cornelius Blackwood, you are under arrest." The click of the handcuffs on the old man's wrists was the sound of a dynasty falling. In the mayor's safe, they found it all. Meticulous records of every murder, every bribe, every stolen deed. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. They had documented their own crimes, never believing they could be caught. For Delaney, the most sickening discovery was the file on her parents, a cold, business-like plan detailing how to murder them and make it look like influenza. She had her justice. It was bloody and ugly, but it was hers. The people of Dead Rock Gulch looked at her with new eyes, not with pity or mockery, but with awe. The poor cowgirl they had dismissed had single-handedly brought down a criminal empire that had been strangling their town for decades. As the sun set, Delaney stood with Colt outside her uncle's cabin, watching the marshals lead their prisoners away. The silver was still there, a fortune sleeping beneath her feet. But it had bought something far more valuable than wealth. It had bought the truth. 6 months later, Delaney Rose McGrow stood on the porch of a new, expanded home built on the foundation of the old adobe cabin. She wore a simple dress, but on her head was a new hat, its band trimmed with a thin, elegant strip of pure silver from her own mine. She was Mrs. Delaney Ramirez now. The McGraw Silver Company was a roaring success, but it was an ethical one. It employed dozens of men from Dead Rock Gulch at fair wages, transforming the town from a dusty backwater into a place of honest prosperity. The curse was broken. The haunted land was now a place of hope. A school had opened, run by Colt's sister, Elena. The boarding house was now a proper hotel, and in the center of the town square stood a new monument, carved from silver-veined quartz. It honored the true memory of Peter Morrison and all the other victims of the Blackwood conspiracy. The trials in Phoenix were a formality. The evidence was too overwhelming. Cornelius Blackwood and his conspirators would spend the rest of their lives in prison. The poor cowgirl who inherited a worthless homestead had done more than just become rich. She had avenged her family. She had brought justice to an entire territory. She had honored the legacy of the good men who had died fighting for the truth. As darkness fell, she and Colt walked to the small cemetery they'd built behind the homestead. Simple stones marked the graves of her uncle and symbolic resting places for her parents and Peter Morrison. The silver trim on her hat caught the starlight. It was a reminder of the wealth, but it was more than that. It was a symbol of her journey, from a girl with nothing but a patched-up hat and grit, to a woman who had faced down murderers and built a better future from the ashes of the past. The greatest treasure wasn't the silver that lay in the ground. It was the steel she had found in her own soul. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the stories we tell are the ones that remind us that even in the darkest of places, courage can strike silver.